don't focus on putting band-aids on your weaknesses because you'll constantly be chasing your tail. Focus on the things you're really good at and find other people to help you with the spots that are your weak spots
Right.
because they're going to be better at it than you.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I am your host, as always, Yonah Weiss. I am grateful to be here today with another awesome guest. We got Andy McQuade on the show. Welcome, Andy. How you doing today?
I am doing well, Yonah. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
The pleasure is mine. I appreciate you joining me. It's been a while. I was on your show, The TCO
Absolutely.
Method, a while back.
Absolutely.
And definitely an awesome show. We'll link that in the show notes for anyone to check
Appreciate
out
that
podcast. And I'd love for you to give a little background for our listeners who may not know who you are, what you do, and kind of, obviously you're in real estate. That's how we're, connected and how we're on the show, but
Absolutely.
love to hear a little more.
So I spent 22 years on the supply side doing building materials, one with a lumberyard, the other one with the Home Depot. My focus was initially real estate development, and then it went to multifamily, spent a little bit of time at a manufacturer, and then had a customer from a large family office, multifamily operator with, at the time, like 12,000 doors under management say, why aren't you consulting full time? And so that's what I do now. And I consult for larger multifamily owner operators. I'd say probably 90% of my clients have been family office. I've only done a couple of syndications. And I do, for my own real estate investing, I do a little bit of hard money on commercial, short-term stuff, 1 to 2 years, as short as 6 months, but the paperwork becomes tough at that point to just keep turning things over. And I help to run 2 different real estate investors organizations, both of them chapters of National REIA, one right here in Rochester, New York, and one in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Wow, so you got a lot going on.
A little bit.
Yeah. It is amazing that you came through that kind of process of purchasing, working kind of corporate, and coming through that into your own, finding real estate to be an industry that I find has so many avenues that people can come to, the same kind of path or different paths really, but can come from really any direction whatsoever. And it's amazing that you took that advice. I mean, that's something that not everyone wants to do. You're in a career, you're doing something, for a decade or two and kind of in your lane. And then someone's like, hey, why don't you become an entrepreneur? And it's like, whoa, it's not built for everyone. So I'm curious, did you have thoughts about that? Did you have experience in entrepreneurship before that or starting your own business? Or was it just like you were kind of trained from the beginning, college, like a lot of people, get a job, do well, kind of thing?
So my dad was an entrepreneur. I grew up with him owning his own business, he was an electrical engineer by trade. So he was doing like emergency backup systems and power systems for like Syracuse University. And at the time there was a lot of industry in New York still. So like his customers were like Smith Corona and IBM and just these big factories that he would go in and he would just do their on-site stuff, which was cool and whatever. So that's kind of what I grew up with. Grew up around construction. There was always an addition or a remodel. My parents built their own house. Our family framed it, did all the framing construction stuff. I was like 8, but it makes an impression on you, right? And I sort of fell into real estate because my first job, I applied at a bunch of places, senior year of high school. And the only callback I got was from 84 Lumber. And this great guy called me up and he's like, come down for an interview. We'd like to talk to you. And his name was Chris Martin, God rest his soul. And he interviewed me for a little while. And he's like, you like to turn a wrench? You like to do this? You like to do that? Okay, you can start now. This was in May. I hadn't even graduated yet. I was like, oh, okay. So I started there. I worked there part-time through college. And then they called me my junior year. And they were like, hey, we want you to go full-time. We want you to be a salaried manager in probably 3 months. I was like, okay. So I dropped out of college. I went full-time. I was a salaried manager at 20 years old. It was a good move for me. It ended up working out. Unlike a lot of stories we hear, I was a general manager of my own store by the time I was 21. And then from there, I got headhunted by Home Depot about 7 years later to come in as a district manager. So I was a district manager for the Home Depot over B2B Pro at 28 years old. And from there, I got hooked up with some larger multifamily operators, right? Not everybody likes Home Depot, but everybody buys from Home Depot, whether they like them or not. And they were still trying to figure out this whole pro thing and figure out how to get into some of the larger places. And it just so happens that I had a lot of large family office operators that were either based here or doing business here. And so I chased them and they taught me the business. And here we are. Long story short, I guess. So yes, there was the traditional, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a
Right.
job. And then the job actually was like, we want you to go full time.
Right.
All
Doesn't
right.
happen too often. And it's amazing that
No,
you were able to take that opportunity, see that opportunity, and then jump it. It sounded like at the time it was like too good to be true.
it kind of was. Yeah, definitely as a dumb kid. Like, would I do it again given the chance? Probably. But there's definitely some financial errors I would not have made. You know, you're 21, 22 years old, you're making more than the average family at that
Mhm.
time. And you're like, oh, I'm going to go buy a brand new car off the parking lot and I'm going to
Right.
pay 8% interest on this car in, you know, whatever it was, 2002, 2003, which was a lot then. Now car loans are stupid, but you can drive a new car off the lot. You're like, yeah, I'll pay this. Sure.
Right.
Whatever. Now I look at it, I go, what was wrong with me? Why did I think that was a good idea?
Right.
But it was a
Right.
really fast car. It was very nice. So
And that's the key when you're 21 years old, you know? Get a
yeah,
nice looking fast
exactly.
car, and that's pretty much it. No, I totally get that, and unfortunately, a lot of people get that, big eyes, you get paid. It's like you go to college, and a lot of times you're in it to after college, you're trying to figure out a lot of people, "What am I gonna do now?" And when you have the opportunity to come and find you before, and something that you're interested in, then it's like it seems to me like a no-brainer. Obviously, the financials, talking about, buying cars and things like that, that could have been different, but I think the choice was clear, right, for you at that time, and that's pretty amazing because not everyone gets an opportunity like that. But you've been
I have
kind of
been
really,
blessed.
yeah, it really is a big blessing. Kind of looking back, 20 years, 25 years later, thinking about things like that. I mean, I see myself also and things that happened to me over the past, 10, 20, 25 years, like, wow. In retrospect, it's incredible how I see it as divine providence, really, that really there's like a hand kind of moving things and putting you in the right meeting the right people at the right times. You just have to
Mhm.
open your eyes to it and see it. That's kind of what I feel.
And for me, the consulting thing started when I had a really bad boss. One of my like not my first boss at Home Depot, but my second boss. I've written about it on LinkedIn a couple times, but this guy just did not like me. We did not get along. We did not see eye to eye. I am very much type A personality. Things need to be done a certain way. My way is working for me. I don't want to change it. Not the best way to go into a leadership position by any means for
Mhm.
me, but I was still a kid, right? I wasn't even 30 yet. So that kind of triggered my, well, maybe I'll do consulting. And it kind of went through a bunch of phases. And I never gave it another thought outside of buying a couple books that are still on the shelf behind me and reading them. And then, things worked out because I had people, I was doing a good job and he couldn't find a reason to get rid of me
Right.
because I was hitting my numbers and whatever. But it was still a wake up call for me to start looking outside the box. And that's where this whole consulting gig came from, I
Yeah.
guess, was just being pushed in that direction by some uncomfortable situations and conversations at a particular job I had. And then he left, and I got a boss who left me alone and just told me to do what I needed to do. And, within like a year of him taking over, I was like number 8 in the company. I'm on a plane every 2 weeks with multifamily family office operators, flying to the Carolinas, flying to Michigan, flying to Virginia, with the VP of construction, walking properties, setting their stuff up, doing all the procurement stuff, which
Hmm.
is sort of how this started. And it all just kind of evolved into more of an operational combined with procurement than just straight procurement. So, which is good because procurement's really boring and people's eyes glaze over. They don't know what it means. Not
Well,
great.
that's true. That is true. Actually, on that note, I would love for you to maybe our listeners who also are thinking, what in the world is but how do you even pronounce that word? Right? How would you describe that in a few sentences for some of our listeners who may not be familiar with what it is that you do?
So, the easiest way to put it is that procurement is how you get all of the products and services that your business needs to operate day to day. It should be everything. It should be your insurance. It should be all of the products that you need to go into your apartments. It should be all your CapEx goods. It should be all of your relationships and contracts for your phone systems, your computers, like anything outside of payroll that's direct W-2 payroll. I mean, procurement should cover even subcontracted labor in a lot of cases because there's contract managers. There's just a ton of different components that go into it.
Hmm.
And honestly, I've been doing this now. directly full time since 2019. So we're getting on to, it'll be 6 years in March.
Hmm.
So it's to the point where I look at it now and it's almost like procurement could control the entire direction of a company if it's set up the way it should be, especially in real estate outside of the underwriting and the whatever. It really does take a lead role in asset management as well. So not a lot of people like to hear that, but it's kind of reality. So decisions you make now impact the property for years down the road, and
Right.
having a good relationship with one of your suppliers, one of your vendors, your insurance broker, even the towns that you're operating in, they can give you a heads up on stuff that's coming down the pipe or help you with something instead of having an adversarial relationship where it's just dog eat dog and we don't really care what you think type of conversation where they just hand you a bill and they're like, this is what it is. Sorry.
Right.
Right.
Now, would that include? It would also include like materials, correct? Like
Yeah.
on the
Any
civil
type of
level,
products that go in.
right?
So that's where I got, obviously, that's where I cut
Exactly
my
right.
teeth, was coming in from the material side. And I actually learned from some of these operators. I had one multifamily operator, very large, based out of New Jersey. At the time, they had like 8,000 doors, but they were spending over $7 million a year with me at the Home Depot because I was doing all their CapEx projects, all their remodels, all their renovations, all their maintenance goods, all their appliances.
Hmm.
Like, and that's who I was on a plane with regularly. And they sort of taught me a little bit through the School of Hard Knocks, but working through issues over several years, just looking at, well, if we avoid this, we don't have this problem down the road. If we buy this, this cuts this problem out. If we
Right.
do this, this saves us money on operations over time. And their model was like everybody else's, right? You buy a property that's a C property or a B property, you do a little bit of value add. Maybe it's more than a coat of paint, and, raise rents, lease up, make corrections and improvements, and just move on and buy the next one, buy the next one. And they were a little bit more focused. They would go into a certain geographical area and they would pick up multiple complexes and they would build those out, and they would pick another geographical area and they would take a couple people from their team, drop them in that area, have them start, buy
Hmm.
multiple complexes, do the same thing so they could hire up a team, steal good people from other operators, and just kind of expand and roll with it from there.
Right.
So, I mean, without them, I wouldn't be able to do this, but I come with the background of knowing how all these large companies, whether it's new construction through the Lumberyard, because I was there for 11 years, or I was an outside sales guy, did everything for those guys. Home Depot was a little bit higher level. It was always like national sales, district management type of stuff.
Hmm.
I ended up with 18 stores before I left, and I was still getting on a plane every few weeks. So part of the reason I left was we had my son and it was getting a little chaotic,
Right.
trying to balance being a dad and being home, but being on a plane from Monday through Friday, getting home, being home for the weekend, and being on a plane again a week later.
Yeah.
So
That's hard. Definitely hard. Now, if someone who doesn't have, a consultant like yourself, typically operation, syndicators or multifamily operators, there's, tons of companies out there that are doing this. They typically have someone on their team who's dealing with asset management, right? Who's in charge of the asset management and procuring on their own different contractors, different vendors, different suppliers, and things like that. Would you say your role is kind of essential to support someone like that or even replace someone like that on a team? If I'm coming in and I don't really have a lot of experience in, and this is true, I don't have a lot of experience with asset management personally. And also, I don't really enjoy it, right? What I enjoy, and the couple times that I've been involved on more of an operational or GP side on a deal, it was more, I was involved in the marketing, I was involved in the capital raising side of things. The asset management, I would sit on meetings and I would just be like totally bored. And I'm not that great at underwriting. I could do it. But again, if I were to come and like, hey, I want to start my own multifamily investment company, I don't have a lot of experience. I'm looking for a partner potentially who's doing that asset management role. Is it something that I could use, you as like a replacement of that potential partner? Or how does that actually work? I'm just kind of curious.
So I'm usually a plug-in where I help them avoid issues long term. So if they're new, I usually don't get involved, honestly, because it's just a lot of head banging my head against the wall, and in a lot of cases, just based on experience. I'm very sorry, that's just the way it is. But the role I come in to fill is usually one where they're looking to do one of two things. They're buying a property and they're looking to do a value add rehab and they're trying to max out ROI, but a lot of the stuff that procurement involves is not an immediate payoff. The immediate payoff comes in from properly negotiating who you're buying from and where you're buying it from and what you're paying in your terms, right? That's like the immediate payback. The long-term payback is, well, we're going to do this stuff and it's going to cut down on utility use. It's going to cut down on maintenance over time. It's going to last longer. You're going to be able to go, instead of having to do a complex rehab every 3 to 5 years, you're going to push that out to 7 to 10 years, because you're going to have more resilient products that are going to hold up better. You're going to generate less waste. There's going to be less, overhead and operating. And there's all these soft costs that get knocked down on the P&L that help to generate more net operating income for that property. The problem with a lot of syndications is that they want to own it for like a year or two. And so a lot of those things that will cost them more upfront, but pay for themselves in 36 months, they're not interested in doing, because they don't even know if they're going to own it in 36 months. So telling them the ROI is 24 to 36 months out, they're going to look at it and go, am I going to do this? Am I not? Family office, they're usually a little bit more strategic, and they will sell in 2 to 3 years sometimes, but it's a different decision-making process that goes into that call. And they go into it assuming a longer term hold in most cases, where they know they're going to hold this asset for 5 years, 7 years, 10
Right.
years before they do something with it. And
Okay.
since it takes a little bit of time for the ROI to kick in, it doesn't always help with the refis either. Like sometimes it falls into that window, sometimes it doesn't. But again, at the very beginning of the project, if we're in there during due diligence, sometimes pre-purchase, we can get an idea of just, number one, what the real scope is going to be, because I've walked enough properties now where,
Right.
I joke, I keep a can of Lysol in the car so I can kill the roach eggs after walking units when I'm walking on carpets, because that's just the life, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But
Thanks for that.
you're welcome. But that's part of it, right?
Hmm.
So the long-term payoff for them should be more NOI, less maintenance, less overhead, all these soft costs go down.
Makes sense.
Does that always work? Yes, if everything goes correctly, but I'm one person. They're not going to bring me in. I have come in and I've done purchasing, I've done procurement, I've managed projects, I've helped people turn apartments where they're like, I don't want to touch anything. You negotiate all the contracts, sign on all the vendors, buy all the stuff, have it shipped here, find a way to store it on site, rent whatever containers you
Right.
need to rent, drop them on the property, do it. Like I've done that. That's fine. Right. But that's not always what I do. Most of the time, I get involved more as an advisory role where their team is executing. I'm saying, this is what we're going to do. I'll help them negotiate. I'll help them find vendors. I'll help them maximize their dollars, but I don't get involved in all of the work. And that works out to be much cheaper for them, because I'm only going to help them at the beginning of the process and then check in with them when they need help from
Right.
time to time. So they're not handing me 5 figures, 6 figures to run a project as almost as a W-2 employee,
Yeah.
which I'm not. I'm a 1099. I'll never W-2.
Sure. No, and I get that. It
Never
makes
again.
sense. Right. It makes sense. I mean, you're able to make your own schedule. You're able to spend time at home. You got your home office going on over there, which is
Correct.
amazing. And I see the books on your bookshelf there, a couple jumping out at me, Who Not How and Never Split the
Hmm.
Difference, two of my favorites, kind of facing the camera as you
Hmm.
were. But I'd love for you to kind of break down. You've already done this a little bit, but how did you come up with the idea, the TCO method, and the start of your podcast, really, which goes through that, but it's really, you're interviewing other people who really come in as a part of that whole, kind of like the whole organism. Love kind of where that brainchild came from.
So shortly after I started out on my own, I was obviously pitching to potential clients that just, some of them just happened to be old clients of mine, old customers of mine from one of my two prior long-term jobs. So I'm on a Zoom call and I'm presenting this deck, and one of the items for specifically, we had walked a unit, it was like 730 apartments on a single location, which was great, very, very large, going through all these details. And one of the things I put on there was, you're going to have a lower total cost of ownership for installing this, because it doesn't have this and this and this that requires maintenance typically after 2 to 3 years. You have to start replacing parts and maintaining. This thing can last for, 10, 12, 15 years before you need to change something in it to operate it. So all of your maintenance calls for that are going to disappear. And it was just like you could hear a pin drop, and he's like, total cost of ownership. And he just started talking about total cost of ownership like it had never occurred to him. And then I started like doing research and thinking about it. I'm like, a lot of what I used to do in my prior role, once I figured this multifamily thing out, was I would not sell everything, which, much to the chagrin of my old bosses, I would not sell everything that was available to be sold through Home Depot, because either it was junk, or we couldn't deliver it correctly, or we couldn't get it on the job site correctly, or we couldn't get it in time, or we didn't have enough, like all these things, right? Everybody complains about Home Depot. Again, everybody buys from them, not everybody likes them. And a lot of the complaints are justified. So to make my job easier, I focused on things that made my job easier, which also helped my customer. And it was an easier sell because maybe it saved them money, not just up front, but over time. So sometimes things were more expensive, but it saved them money over time. Less headaches, less calls, less maintenance, less this. And I started looking into this whole total cost of ownership thing. And lo and behold, it's been done in IT since like the 80s. So I started reading about total cost of ownership and I'm like, why is nobody applying this to real estate? And I look it up and there's literally like nobody putting it out there for real estate. I'm like, how is that possible? Like, this has been around. It makes total sense. The problem is real estate isn't a factory, right? It's been used in IT, it's been used in manufacturing for decades, but it's not a fixed environment. You don't know what the inputs are going to be. You don't know how things are going to interact. Every single location is different. Every single building is different. Every single management team, every single environmental, everything, every town, every city, whatever, it becomes way too complicated to actually look at a piece of real estate and go, this is the total cost of ownership for this building. You can take and list all the inputs, you can take and list all the outputs and all the whatever, but the minute a tenant moves in that isn't how you expected them to be, or doesn't tell you the complete truth on their application, or the minute you hire a maintenance manager who says they can do all this stuff, but in reality can't do any of this stuff, then the whole calculation goes out the window. But what you can do, and kind of how this has been built, is to look at how all of that stuff works and then just go to, I hate to say this, but you build everything for the lowest common denominator. So you eliminate complications by taking the chance that human interaction will screw it up away, or minimizing the amount of damage or maintenance cost in this case, or capex or lifespan. You build the stuff to max out what the long-term probability is of avoiding problems. And so it's sort of a cost avoidance play. There's some risk management that goes into it. There's definitely some planning and some strategy, and stuff changes at the top at the asset management level, not necessarily during underwriting, but during operations, where you're going, well, if we use this product, we know we're going to have this and this and this happen, right? Like you buy a apartment complex that's got sheet vinyl, rolled sheet vinyl that used to be used all the time. You're like, oh, this stuff is junk. Well, what am I going to put in there? Are you going to put in more sheet vinyl? Or are you going to put in like an LVT? Or are you going to put in tile? Or maybe there's a damaged hardwood underneath that you can uncover and you can just refinish all the floors. Like, what's the option going to be? I've seen all of those things. And then you just weigh what the long-term plan for the property is and make that decision as to, well, what kind of tenants are we going to be bringing in? What's the location? What's the demographics? How is this going to happen? Are we allowing pets? Or are we not? Are we going to have lots of little kids? Or are we not? Right. And
Right.
all that stuff goes into, okay, this is the product we're going to settle on. And it's the same there's a ton of different things that go into a unit, and all of those things get spelled out in some fashion. And then you go to contract and try and find a way to buy that for that property in the most effective way possible for however long you're going to own it. And so total cost of ownership looks at how long the hold is, and you make your plans on that. So for a syndicator, a lot of times cheaper is better, and no one cares about the long-term hold. So it's almost like flipping a house where you buy it, you do whatever to it, and you sell it, you unload it on somebody else. And then 2 years down the line, all that stuff that you put in that's falling apart becomes their problem. It's not your problem anymore. Is that the
Right.
best way to look at it? Not really, but that's the reality of the situation, right? I've never been one to pull punches. Kind of how it is. House flippers and some syndications, that's exactly how it is. They get in, milk it for everything it's worth, and get
Yep.
out.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, that is like a valid for a lot of people, a valid business plan. And
It is.
that's what their goal is. And obviously that's not everyone. Not everyone is planning, buying multifamily and holding it as a legacy or 5, 10, 15 year ownership plan. A lot of it, the business
Correct.
plan, especially when syndicators or, house flippers and things like that, when investors are involved, their return of capital is one of the biggest factors
Mhm.
in the return on investment. And so the quicker they can get in, do what they need to do, get out is really, I mean, that's what makes their business run. So yeah, I mean, I totally get that it's not
Yeah.
really necessarily in line with what your advisory position is, because in a lot of ways it's not even, it's almost counterintuitive to some of their business plan.
It is. And like I said, I've helped them. I've helped a few different ones, and I've had operators who are family office who buy and will do, like, just on a fluke, They needed to do a syndication, so
Sure.
they did a raise. I think there was only like 4 investors involved. It wasn't like a very open one for a 30 million buy. So it was like a syndication between a bunch of family offices almost who just didn't want a JV on it for whatever reason. But for them, it was going to be, they went into it thinking maybe this will be a 5-year hold, maybe this will be a 3-year hold. We don't really know. So let's look at all the options and we'll just figure it out. And because it was over 3 years, it was like everything I was suggesting was going to work out for them anyway. So they just did it all, which was great. But it doesn't always work that way, right? So it's about the benefit to the business and the investors. And like you said, sometimes it's just counterintuitive to
Yeah.
spend the extra upfront because it's not going to give them an ROI. A
Right.
lot of what I end up doing for them is like a real quick advisory, like, give me a few grand. We'll look at your books. We'll see who you're buying from. Make sure that the volume of stuff that you're spending money on aligns with the pricing you're getting and the terms you're getting and the service you're getting. Because a lot of them don't have simple stuff that, we used to do on a regular basis in my prior life was like vendor scorecards, like
Right.
who's delivering products on time? What's your fill rate? How often is this are you giving them the right price based on the volume that they're buying at and all this other stuff? And a lot of people, I'd say the vast majority are spending something like 15 to 20% more on just product than maybe they should be because they don't have their hands wrapped around it. Either they push it off to an automated portal that does it
Mhm.
all for them, or it's completely unplanned and everybody just buys whatever they buy, or they
Right.
pawn it off on their subs and their subs buy it at full price.
Sure.
And then they charge them 10 or 15% or 20% or 30% more.
Hmm.
So they're actually, in some cases, paying 40, 50% higher prices for products than they
Crazy.
could get if they had just negotiated properly. In every instance I've gone in, you could hire somebody for 60 grand a year, 70 grand a year, and had them run a purchasing procurement department in the office, and it pays for itself usually within the first 12 months. So
That's a good pitch
that's
right there.
it's scary. It kind of is, but it's a scary number when you look at it. For me, on the other side, it's like I used to get beat up on this stuff all the time. How are these companies not beating people up like they used to beat me up? Like I used to get my butt kicked pretty regularly. But maybe it was because it was Home Depot. Maybe it was because, the place was an 84 lumber. But I knew where my margins had to be competitive. And so I would just go in the door at those margins and try to deliver the service and all the other stuff that went with it.
Hmm.
Some of these vendors have no idea what they're doing, which is unfortunate for
Yeah.
usually the end user more than for them.
100%. No, for sure. For sure. Now, I'd love to get your take on, you said you started or you run a meetup, 2 meetups actually. You said one in upstate New York where you are and the other one in Knoxville, did you say? Tennessee?
Knoxville, yeah. Yep.
That's amazing.
Yep. So they're
So
both chapters of National RIA.
okay. So what kind of people come to those? I mean, REIA, REIA for those of our listeners who may not be familiar, which you probably should be, but these are real estate investment. What's the A stand for?
Associations.
Associations. Right, right, right,
Yep.
right. So you're basically meetups, local and literally in every city you can find one of these. And basically a
Usually. Yep.
place to network with other real estate investors or people in the real estate industry who, it's great networking. A lot of education comes through that as well. How did you get involved with
Yep.
that and really starting and running your own?
So I definitely don't run either one by myself, or I'm definitely part of a team and I add some things. So I got involved, initially started going as the Home Depot guy because Home Depot has a contract with the National RIA organization where they give them like discounts and rebates and all this other stuff that goes into it. So I started like 2008, 2009 attending. I wouldn't go to every meeting, but I'd go to a few. And then I started learning stuff. So like 2010 or 2011, I learned about investing through your IRA, your self-directed IRA, and through a Roth and through this and through that. And I'm like, wow, why am I not doing that? That's kind of dumb. So like while I was at the meeting, still working a W-2, I was like, I want to roll some money over from my 401k into this Roth thing. Let's make that happen. So, I did that and started doing, and now that's how I do a lot of my hard money is through self-directed IRA lending, which is a little complicated, but definitely worthwhile. If you've got a 401k and you want to diversify a little bit, it's a good way to do it. But I started going to those meetings, learned a lot about, the usual stuff. So a lot of these real estate investors associations are for newbies, people who want to do something else and don't know how or don't know how to get started, don't know where to go. And back then, I mean, you're talking about this is before Bigger Pockets was like a thing. And I would argue now in 2025 that they're actually a better resource than Bigger Pockets at this point, just because of the direction Bigger Pockets has gone in the last few years. So nothing against them, but that's my opinion. I don't want to get Yonah in trouble. But the mix is largely like your volunteers that are helping to run the organization are usually more experienced investors that are either trying to give back to the community. Hopefully, not all of them are trying to sell something like a coaching or a mentoring or whatever. Hopefully, they're just there to give back. The RIA here in the local market that I help with is a not for profit. So it's a 501c6 membership based organization. National RIA is also a 501c6 membership based organization. They partner up with the National Apartment Association, NMHC. They partner up with a bunch of different larger orgs to do some advocacy work and some lobbying and some other things to make sure that the industry stays accessible and is taken care of and not overregulated into oblivion. Does it always work? No. We're not going to talk about that. The better organizations, in my opinion, have that mix where you get experienced investors and the less experienced investors, and they show up because there's value to both sides. So the larger orgs that have been around for a long time, like the one up here in Rochester, there's 5 to 7 meetings a month or get-togethers a month where you have one really big one that could have 100 people there. And then there's a bunch of smaller ones that are either topic specific or just networking. Like there's a coffee club that meets up every Monday. Start your week off right. If you're, working a W-2, it starts at 7 a.m. You show up, you drink coffee with other investors, you network, you go to work, or you go to your properties, or you go do whatever it is you need to do afterwards. You have meetings for alternative investments where they talk about not single family apartments and flipping houses. They talk about wholesaling. They talk about doing self-storage or doing, hard money lending or doing tax liens or doing whatever. And then you've got other meetings that are specific to the landlord where it's like, here's what's happening, on the legal basis, like up here in Rochester, everybody's up in arms on that side of it because we just passed good cause eviction. So now Rochester's a good cause eviction city, and it was like 7-2 on the city council. The mayor just signed it in on Friday. It's a done deal. It takes effect immediately. There's a rent control cap involved. It gets rid of any type of holdovers. So you can't do a holdover eviction anymore. Makes it pretty painful for a lot of investors, but it's only within the city limits. So, Rochester is a very small MSA. It's like 1.5 million people in the MSA, but really residents in the city, it's like 300,000. But these groups are great because they keep you informed on how to deal with these issues, right? Like good cause eviction passes. Well, what do we do? Well, we had a legal update from our sponsor attorney that came in with his team of 8, and they went through every single part of it and how to work around it and what you needed to do to make sure you were in compliance and all this other stuff last week. There's like 103 people in the room, not including the vendors and the team that helped run the meeting. And, it was hugely valuable for everybody that was there from at least the feedback we got, but it keeps you kind of boots on the ground with what's happening.
Exactly. That's probably the most important part, right? Because everyone's doing their own thing. And just going back to what you said about, hopefully not everyone is there to sell something, right? That's unfortunately, I've been in situations like that where it's like, you want to have potential, networking customers and clients and things like that. But when everyone is there just to sell someone else something, it kind of
Correct.
ruins it for everyone. But no, the educational aspect, I think, is probably the most important part. So if you are looking for your local RIA, I mean, you can just Google RIA, or you can go, I'm sure there's a website, you can go to meetup.com. A lot of times we'll have stuff like that. And even on Bigger Pockets website itself, they have a section there for meetings, meetups, things like that. And you can search based on, your zip code, within a 5, 10, 50 mile radius, and find local, meetups or real estate. Even if they're not officially RIAs, there are other real estate investment kind of groups, and great opportunity to kind of in-person network. And we've had so many guests on the show talk about the importance of that and really the game changer that has been in their entire investment business or career. So cannot stress that enough. And kind of a little teaser right now, because we have recently announced 3 different Yonah Weiss real estate connections in-person meetups that are going to be happening probably at around the time of this recording. So if you hear this, it's probably going to be happening in the next week or two, in which one is going to be in New Jersey, one in Charlotte, North Carolina, the other one in Dallas. So if you are listening to this and want to find out more about those, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, wherever you can, or yonahweiss.com. And without further ado, I'd love to jump into what we call the final 4. Andy, these are 4 questions I like to ask all my guests. And for you, the first one is, what is the worst job that you ever had?
So for me, I left Home Depot in 2018 and I took a job with a manufacturer. And as time went on, I realized that that was not at all what I wanted to do. It was great, right? It was a pay bump for me. I was running an international sales team, putting stuff into Canada, Japan, and across the US, making all my decisions. I was actually on a plane almost as much as I was with Depot, which sort of backfired on me because that was part of the reason I was looking to get out of there. And I wasn't working with multifamily anymore. I wasn't working with small operators. I went to working with architects and GCs and big, huge super corporations, right? We were putting product into like offices for Amazon and Facebook and Microsoft. We're in Seattle, we're in Portland, we're in LA, we're doing all this crazy stuff. I'm on a plane supporting my sales team, and I'm like, this is not cool. I thought this was going to be good. I don't want to do this. And I went to coffee with a VP from that family office with like 11,000 doors. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, why aren't you consulting full time and doing this full time? Because he had just taken over procurement and risk management. And I was like, I don't know. That's a great question. And then 2 months later, I left. I had my LLC open 2 weeks after the meeting with him, and the rest is history. So yeah, that was the worst job,
Yeah.
just because it was not what it was what I expected, but it was not what I wanted to do, I found out. And I got a lot of phone calls from people who missed me and wanted to keep in touch, which was great. And a lot of them went on to become customers that for what I do now, which is also great.
Mhm. For
So
sure.
that was the worst job, mostly because it was a kind of a dumb decision. But if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't be doing this. So worst
Understandable.
job, still good decision, worked out in the end.
Absolutely. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of times it's sometimes those opportunities that come our way when you least expect it. So yeah, well, good to hear that. And second question is going to be, what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift? And I see tons of great books on your shelf over there,
There's
and
so
I'm
many
sure.
books over my shoulder. Probably the one that was the biggest paradigm shift for me, and this is going back probably 10 or 12 years, was a book called Now Discover Your Strengths, which is now, I think, called Clifton Strengths Finder 2 point whatever. And it was something we were forced to do at Home Depot.
Okay.
And as I built out my, because we did these management training enhancement,
Right.
continuing education things every year. We had something different we did. And this one was kind of an oddball because it bucketed you based on not like your personality type or your disc assessment or whatever. It bucketed you into the way your brain works and how you process information. And
Mm,
apparently, once you hit like 20 or 22 years old, it never changes. So you take the test at 22, you take the test again at 40, you get the same exact results that you got both
interesting.
times,
Wow.
which is not something I would have expected, but I actually did that, right? Because I did this like 12, 15 years ago. I did it again last year and it was exactly the same results. And
Wow.
I was like, wow, it really is kind of cool. And it buckets you into like your top 15 strengths. And the whole point of the book is don't focus on putting band-aids on your weaknesses because you'll constantly be chasing your tail. Focus on the things you're really good at and find other people to help you with the spots that are your weak spots
Right.
because they're going to be better at it than you. Like you're going to be a jack of all trades, but you're going to be super mediocre at the things that either don't interest you or that you're not good at,
For sure.
as opposed to somebody who is good at those things, who enjoys doing them and will execute them at a higher level than you will every single time. And as a guy with ADHD, I'm like, oh, I don't have to do stuff I hate. That's perfect. So that was kind of my paradigm shift was why am I focusing on all this band-aiding and covering all this garbage that doesn't help me
Yeah.
find fulfillment? So for me, like 8 out of my top 10 were all in strategy. So there's 4 buckets
Mm,
and 8 out of the top 10 of mine were in strategy. And then there was like a couple in execution. And for me, it was like a no brainer. I was like, oh, this is actually how my brain works. Like I get this now. And it explains not just how to operate your own business interests, right? And how to do your job, but how to manage people who have different and interact with people who have different strengths and kind of build your team. So like Who Not How is a great book, don't get me
right.
wrong, but that whole concept of finding people to do things that you don't enjoy, that don't fill your bucket or that
Hmm.
you're not great at, that for me 12, 15 years ago was huge,
Yeah.
huge, complete game changer on how I did everything.
For sure. No, that makes sense. And I actually never heard of that. So I'm glad you brought that up because obviously Who Not How I'm very familiar with and it sounds like very similar concepts there, but haven't had that paradigm shift 15 years ago was probably huge.
It was great.
As you said, yeah. Third question, what's a skill or talent that you would like to learn? And this could be anything.
So I like to tinker around with stuff, whether it's computers or vehicles or whatever. And that's sort of always been a hobby of mine, but I have been terrified of opening up an engine or opening up a transmission and figuring out how to make them go. And I'll probably never touch a transmission, honestly, but I would love to take a vehicle and just pull the engine out of it and rebuild the engine and do all the things. And, I'm not talking about like buying machinery and running an engine shop. I just want to do it because I think it's cool and I want to see, what there is to see inside. So I would love to figure out how to do that and have the time to do it. Doesn't seem like it's going to be reality for a while, but that is on my bucket list of a skill that I would like to develop. And we
Yeah,
have some nicer vehicles in the family that eventually will end up in my garage. So having something that ties into some stuff from the 60s and 70s would be pretty handy.
that's cool. Yeah, no, definitely. And fascinating. That's actually, if I'm not mistaken, the first time that that's ever been mentioned on the show, a skill like that. So we have a lot of times repeat skill that people are interested in, languages or a musical instrument or flying a plane. I've had a bunch of times, but this is kind of working on cars and being a mechanic. That's fascinating. So good for you. Hope you're able to do that. And fourth and final question is, what does success mean to you?
That's a tough one because it seems to be a moving target, and I think
Yeah.
it's changed for me over time. But I would have to say being able to spend the time intentionally where I need to be without having to worry about that next appointment, that next meeting, that next sale, that next call, that next whatever. That's probably for me the best example, but I also have an 11-year-old, right? As he ages,
Mm,
I'm sure that's going to change again as he gets to be old enough where he's not dependent on us for car rides and trip planning and all the other crazy stuff that goes into being a parent. For us, he was 4 or 5 during the pandemic, and I had launched my business 8 months prior to everything shutting down. So it was sort of
perfect
like
timing.
a convenient culture shock from, he's kind of in daycare and he's doing this and then goes to kindergarten and then bam,
Right.
here's the crazy wall of stupid that we slam into at 100 miles an hour, right? And it was very convenient for me because while my wife telecommuted, I was able to like focus on building the business and creating content and developing business plans and doing cold calls and outreach and telling everybody what I'm doing while being able to pick him up, take him to school, drop him off at events and
Right.
whatever. And now he's in Boy Scouts or whatever they call themselves now, Scouting America. He's in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's in Muay
Cool.
Thai. He does like all like it's pretty cool, but for me, that level of freedom and the ability to do that without sacrificing business interests or meetings or whatever is huge. Like if I was working a W-2, there's zero chance that I'd be able to do that stuff with him. So for me, it's a blessing, but I don't know that I necessarily feel successful because I still worry about the next meeting, the next trip, the next
Right.
conference, the where is this going to come from, all the sales stuff that goes into being a one man show.
Yeah. Makes sense. And definitely love to hear your perspective on that. So I appreciate you for all that you've shared today and just in general for joining me on the show. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And
No, I love your
yeah,
show. It's great. I'm honored
eh,
to have been on. It's
thank you.
it's awesome. You have so many good people, so many good topics, so many different points of view. So it's just a breadth of experience. Like I try to keep my show very bucketed into
Right.
operations improvement, right?
Right.
So there's insurance, and I had you on to talk about cost seg and talking about just operations and underwriting and asset management and all this other stuff. I don't get a chance to do a lot of the same stuff you do, and it would I think dilute my brand for the
Right.
show and my audience, but
True.
you've successfully just knocked it out of the park with how you build your show. So,
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks again for
absolutely.
joining me. And for our listeners, where can they find you or reach out to you if they want?
So you can find me on pretty much every social media in some form of Andy McQuade. So the easiest place to go for that is to just go to my link tree. It's linktr.ee/Andy McQuade, all one word.
Okay.
That'll take you to everything, all my podcast appearances, all of my social media outlets, some certain select websites and stuff. Like my business website's on there, my personal website's on there. You can check it out. AndyMcQuade.com, but I'll warn you, it hasn't been updated since like during the pandemic. So there's a bunch of stuff on there that doesn't really apply to real estate or doing any type of operation stuff necessarily.
Okay. We'll link it nonetheless. And, hopefully our listeners will be able to reach out in whatever form they want. So I appreciate you again joining us. And to our listeners, thank you all for listening and tuning in once again, all the way to the end. And remember, until next time, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn, send me a DM, a connection request, Yonah Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.